At 8:44 a.m. on June 15, 1944, a Higgins boat rocked like a tin can on a black-green sea. 300 yards from Saipan's southern beaches, the water didn't look like water anymore, just churned foam and shrapnel splashes. Japanese artillery walked the surf like a giant stamping down, one shell after another, exploding in bursts that made the air itself seem solid. First Lieutenant Frank Tachovsky crouched low, one hand clenched around the boat's cold steel, the other resting near his rifle like a superstition. 29 years old, a Marine officer who looked older than his age because the Pacific did that to men, salt, sun, fear, and the constant math of survival. Behind him, 40 Marines sat in the same cramped space. And here was the part no one in headquarters wanted to talk about out loud. Every one of them was a problem, not colorful, not rough around the edges, not high-spirited. Problems. Brig recruits, punishment detail veterans, fighters, thieves. Men who didn't salute fast enough, didn't keep their mouths shut, didn't fit cleanly into the Marine Corps' idea of what an elite unit should be. A staff officer back in Hawaii had called Tachovsky's platoon suicide with extra steps. But Tachovsky wasn't interested in being liked. He was interested in getting men home. The ramp hadn't even dropped yet, and he could already see the beach through the smoke. A low seam of sand, then a darker strip of brush, then higher ground where the Japanese had buried concrete and steel into the island like teeth. He leaned toward the men behind him, his 40 thieves, and spoke over the engine roar. "Remember," he said, "we land with the first wave. We go inland. We don't stop. We don't bunch up. We don't die on the beach." A few men grinned like it was a joke. Others stared straight ahead like they'd already left their bodies. Somewhere among them was a former boxer. Somewhere was a man who'd worked as muscle for a gangster back in Chicago. Somewhere was a kid so young he still carried adolescence in his shoulders. And all of them, every last one, had been selected because they had something the Marine Corps usually punished. They could think for themselves. Another shell hit the surf. The boat shuddered. Tachovsky's eyes narrowed. Because he knew the truth that manuals didn't print. The most dangerous moment in a battle is not the first shot. It's the first decision. And his first decision was already made. He was about to send 40 criminals into the jungle and trust them to do what disciplined men could not. 7 months earlier, the Marine Corps had bled itself white on Tarawa. 76 hours, less than 4 days. And in that tiny slice of coral and sand, the Marines lost nearly 1,000 men, killed, missing, drowned, burned, shredded by machine guns they didn't know existed until they were already walking into their fields of fire. Tarawa didn't just hurt, it embarrassed. Because the Marines didn't lose due to lack of courage. They lost because they didn't know what was waiting for them beyond the reef. After Tarawa, Colonel James "Jim" Risley of the 6th Marine Regiment asked permission to form something different. A specialized scout sniper platoon. A unit that could land early, push inland fast, locate the hidden pillboxes and mortar pits and observation posts, and feed that information back to naval gunfire and artillery before the main regimental body walked into slaughter. It sounded reasonable. It sounded obvious. But in wartime, obvious still fights bureaucracy. The Marine Corps in 1944 was proud of its discipline, proud of standardization, proud of doing things the Marine way. Elite units, so the manuals implied, were built from the most obedient men. But Risley wasn't looking for obedient. He was looking for effective. And effective in the Pacific meant a specific type of skill set. Move without being seen. Kill without being heard. Survive without supply. Decide without asking permission. Those skills didn't always grow in polite gardens. They grew in alleyways, in bar fights, in bad childhoods, in rough cities, in the places where a man learned that rules didn't protect you, only awareness did. Risley found his officer to build this unit in Frank Tachovsky. Tachovsky had a reputation, smart, hard, and unconventional enough to make conservative officers uncomfortable. He also had something else. He had a theory. And his theory was simple. The Marine Corps was full of men it didn't know how to use. Men with disciplinary records weren't always cowards. Sometimes they were just combustible. A Marine who got into a fight didn't always get in trouble because he was useless. Sometimes he got in trouble because he won. And Tachovsky wanted the winner. That became his recruiting philosophy. 2 Marines fight. Winner goes to the brig. Loser goes to the infirmary. Tachovsky wanted the man who could take punishment and keep standing. He wanted the man who could survive close combat. He wanted the man who didn't freeze when the world got ugly. The Corps called those men troublemakers. Tachovsky called them survivors. And if you think that sounds reckless, you're not alone. A lot of officers thought he was building a unit of liabilities. But Tachovsky wasn't naive. He didn't recruit men because they were bad. He recruited them because they were capable. And then he planned to shape that capability into something precise. Not a gang, a weapon. Camp Tarawa in Hawaii wasn't a glamorous place. It was heat, dust, sweat, and the constant feeling of being watched by the jungle itself. Over 2 months, Tachovsky assembled his platoon, about 42 at first, pulled from punishment details across the division. The range of ages alone would make a peacetime training officer panic. 17 to 34. And the backgrounds, not the kind of thing you put on a recruitment poster. Some had criminal records before the Marines. Assault, theft, street fighting. One had been a professional boxer, which meant his hands came pre-trained. Another had worked as a bodyguard for men who didn't settle disputes with paperwork. The Marine Corps gave them a choice that didn't feel like a choice. Military prison or combat duty. They chose combat. But Tachovsky didn't just hand them rifles and say, "Go be criminals in enemy territory." He trained them hard, harder than many line units, because behind enemy lines, tough isn't enough. You need competence. So Camp Tarawa became a place where standard Marine training was not replaced, but expanded. They learned silent killing, not Hollywood knife throws, not dramatic chokeholds. Practical, grim, close work. How to approach a sentry. How to control the body so it doesn't fall with noise. How to finish fast. How to leave nothing that screams, "Someone was here." Movement discipline. Not marching, not formation. Spacing, hand signals, visual contact without talking. How to move through vegetation without making it look like anyone moved through it. How to stop and listen in a way most men never learn. Observation. Because recon isn't heroism. Recon is patience. They practiced looking at a ridgeline and seeing what most men missed, a shadow that doesn't match the sun, a patch of brush that looks too arranged, a rock shape that's just a little too geometric. Marksmanship. They trained with M1903 Springfields fitted with scopes, learning to hit man-sized targets at ranges that made average riflemen shake their heads. And because the Japanese sometimes counterattacked with armor, they learned the bazooka too. Not as a nice-to-have, as a survival tool. They studied Japanese tactics, Japanese fortification patterns, Japanese map symbols. They learned how Japanese units moved, how they searched, how they set ambushes, how they defended caves. And yes, Tachovsky let them steal as part of survival training. Because in 1944, the Marines were notoriously undersupplied compared to other branches. Marines scrounged, Marines traded, Marines acquired. And Tachovsky's men excelled at acquisition. They raided Army depots for food, Navy warehouses for gear. They borrowed trucks, jeeps, and supplies with the casual professionalism of men who had spent their whole lives finding what they needed in a world that didn't hand it to them. Other Marines started calling them the 40 Thieves. The name stuck. At first it was an insult. Then it became a brand. And by June 1944, the 40 Thieves had something dangerous, a shared identity. They weren't just punished men anymore. They were a unit, and they knew their mission. Land with the first wave. Push inland. Locate Japanese positions. Radio coordinates. Disappear into the jungle. Stay alive for days behind enemy lines. No support, no rescue, and if captured, Saipan wasn't occupied territory. It was considered part of Japan. The defenders wouldn't treat prisoners like prisoners. They would treat them like an insult. And the 40 thieves understood that. Which meant they also understood something else. On Saipan, surrender wasn't an option. The Higgins boat ramp dropped. Cold water hit their legs. Machine gun fire kicked up spray like angry fingers tapping the ocean. Tachovsky moved first. Always first. Not because he wanted glory, because he knew panic spreads from the front. If the leader hesitates, everyone hesitates. So he went forward through surf and smoke, men following, weapons held high, eyes scanning. They hit the beach around 8:47 a.m., and the beach was chaos. Mortars landing, men falling, units mixing, orders lost in noise. The standard battlefield urge is to stop, because stopping feels like control. But Tachovsky's order was the opposite. Keep moving. His platoon didn't fight for the seawall. They threaded through the confusion and pushed inland fast, skipping cover that would tempt other units to hunker down. By 9:30 a.m., they were already roughly 300 yards inland, farther than almost any other unit on that stretch of beach. And then something happened that almost never happens in war. Silence. Not total silence. Never total. But the beach roar faded. The jungle swallowed sound. And suddenly, 40 men realized they were alone on an island with an estimated 30,000 Japanese troops. Night would fall in hours. And that's when the real mission would begin. Tachovsky spread them out, 50 yards apart, maintaining visual contact by hand signals refined during training. Standard doctrine said stay together, advance in formation, maintain constant radio contact. But Tachovsky's orders were different. Operate independently. Report enemy positions. Make your own decisions. No other unit on Saipan had that authority. That freedom was their strength. And it was also what made higher command nervous. Because freedom in combat can look like chaos, right up until it saves your life. Around 10:15 a.m., Sergeant Bill Knoppel spotted the first major Japanese position, a concrete pillbox built into a ridge, camouflaged with vegetation. Placed to cover the valley below with interlocking fire, exactly where Marines would advance later. Inside, a Type 92 heavy machine gun. Crew, about 7. The position was invisible from the beach. It was a trap waiting for men who didn't know where to look. Tachovsky studied the ridge, looked at his map. He had a choice. If he attacked, he'd reveal his platoon's presence and compromise recon. If he didn't, dozens, maybe hundreds of Marines might die in that valley later. He made the decision in 30 seconds. This is the part of Tachovsky's story that matters, even more than any heroic bazooka shot. He understood the purpose of reconnaissance isn't information, it's prevention, so he ordered a bazooka team forward. Private Marvin Strombo positioned himself about 80 yards from the pillbox. At 10:32 a.m., he fired. The rocket slammed into the firing slit, detonated inside. The position went silent. And before the smoke cleared, the 40 thieves were already moving again, 300 yards deeper into the jungle, leaving behind only the destroyed pillbox as their signature. When Marine units advanced through that valley later, they didn't encounter that machine gun. They never even knew it was there. And that's the kind of success that doesn't get medals. It gets men home. By noon, the 40 thieves had mapped a staggering number of enemy sites. Machine gun nests, mortar pits, observation posts, ammo caches. Tachovsky transmitted coordinates back using encoded protocols. And within minutes, naval gunfire began turning those coordinates into craters. From concealed positions, the 40 thieves watched destroyer shells smash fortifications they had marked half an hour earlier. This was the new way of fighting. Don't die proving the enemy is there. Mark him. Erase him. Move on. And in that rhythm, observe, report, vanish. The 40 thieves moved 2 miles inland by early afternoon. They were walking through terrain the main Marine body wouldn't reach for days. And then they found something that changed the entire threat picture. At approximately 3:40 p.m., the platoon discovered what looked like a grove that didn't belong. Camouflage netting, tracks in the soil, a strange regularity in the shadows. Then they saw steel. Not one, not two, dozens. 37 Type 97 medium tanks under netting, staged like sleeping animals. Marine intelligence had guessed maybe a dozen tanks on Saipan. The 40 thieves had found 3 times that number in one location. Tachovsky's mind ran the math immediately. If those tanks hit the beachhead at night, when naval gunfire is less responsive, when visibility collapses, when lines are confused, they could push through to supply dumps, artillery batteries, command posts. They could turn a successful landing into a disaster. He radioed headquarters. The response came fast and frustrating. Naval guns were already busy. Airstrikes committed elsewhere, artillery still being unloaded. No assets for 4 hours. 4 hours might as well be a lifetime, because by then it would be dark. And tanks don't wait for your scheduling conflicts. So Tachovsky did what officers aren't supposed to do. He looked at the enemy and considered solving the problem himself. His platoon carried 6 bazookas, 6 rounds per launcher, 36 rockets, 37 tanks. The math was almost perfect, and the decision would violate every tactical principle. A 40-man unit does not attack a tank battalion, but Tachovsky hadn't recruited men who followed principles. He recruited men who survived. At 4:15 p.m., he gave the quiet order to prepare an assault. Bazooka teams moved into a semicircle around the staging area, spacing about 40 yards. Plan: hit as many tanks as possible in the first 30 seconds, then vanish into jungle before infantry could react. They didn't expect to destroy all 37, but disabling even 10 or 15 could save the beach. And then, at 4:25 p.m., the jungle changed. The tanks started their engines, all at once. 37 diesel engines roaring to life like a mechanical thunderstorm. Crewmen emerged. Officers shouted. Infantry formed around the armor. This wasn't a reposition. This was preparation for attack. Tachovsky checked his watch. Sunset, 7:12 p.m. The Japanese were planning a dusk assault, earlier than expected. The window for a surprise strike had closed. So Tachovsky did something that again shows what kind of leader he was. He didn't cling to the plan because it was bold. He abandoned it because it was stupid now. His new order: shadow the tanks, report their movement in real time, let the main marine defense prepare. It wasn't glamorous, but it was correct, and it might have saved the invasion. The Japanese tank battalion began moving around 5:07 p.m. 2 columns along parallel jungle routes. Infantry alongside about 1,000 men. This was not a probing attack. This was meant to break the Americans before they consolidated. The 40 thieves followed 200 yards to the flank, slipping through cover, using terrain, staying just close enough to see but far enough to disappear if patrols turned. Every 10 minutes, Tachovsky radioed updated coordinates. And down at the beach, Marines adjusted. Bazookas redistributed. Shermans moved up. Artillery batteries shifted. Everyone braced for tanks. Then around 6:15 p.m., a mile from the beach, the Japanese halted. Officers gathered, argued, gestured toward different directions. Then the formation changed course. Instead of continuing toward the main beachhead, the tanks turned north. That surprised Tachovsky. Why north? It looked like nothing on the map. Mostly rough terrain. Jungle, bad roads for armor. But the Japanese clearly had an objective. They moved another mile north, then turned west again. By 7:05 p.m., as the sun touched the horizon, Tachovsky understood. They weren't aiming at the main beach. They were aiming at the gap, the seam between the 2nd Marine Division and the 4th, a seam held by a thin defense. If armor punched through there, it could split American forces in half. He radioed the warning, but the timing was perfect for the Japanese. Dusk. Frequencies shifting for night ops. Ammo resupply midstream. Shermans refueling. The gap was held by roughly 2 companies, around 340 men, against 37 tanks and 1,000 infantry. At 7:23 p.m., the Japanese attack began. From higher ground, the 40 thieves watched tanks roll forward through twilight. The first 3 tanks exploded under bazooka fire, but 34 kept coming. Infantry charged behind them. Marines fell back. The breakthrough looked like it might succeed. And then Tachovsky saw a nightmare within the nightmare. 1 tank separated from the main assault. heading toward the 6th Marines Command Post, where Colonel Risley coordinated the response. A single tank in the right place could do what 30 tanks couldn't: cut the head off the defense, destroy radios, kill staff, paralyze response. The tank moved through a ravine at about 15 miles per hour, and Risley's command post was only 400 yards away. Unaware, Tachovsky had maybe 3 minutes. He grabbed Private Herbert Hodges, his best bazooka shooter. Hodges had been perfect in training, but training doesn't shoot back. Training doesn't angle armor. Training doesn't hide behind darkness. The Type 97's frontal armor could deflect a bad shot. Hodges needed a clean side angle. Tachovsky and Hodges ran downslope in a dead sprint, racing to intercept. They reached position about 30 yards from the tank's projected path. They waited. The tank emerged, turret rotating, commander exposed in hatch, scanning. 25 yards. 20. 15. Then it stopped. Engine idled. The commander checked a map, trying to confirm position. Hodges fired. The rocket hit the tank's left side just below the turret ring. Thin armor. Penetration. Detonation. Crew killed instantly. 6 seconds later, ammunition cooked off. The tank erupted into flame. The fireball lit the jungle like a flare. And in that moment, something accidental happened. Japanese infantry nearby saw the explosion and assumed they'd hit a major Marine strong point. They redirected away from the command post toward what they thought was heavier resistance. The command post stayed alive. Risley kept coordinating. And one bazooka shot became the difference between an organized defense and chaos. But it also revealed the 40 Thieves' position to everyone within 500 yards. Machine gun fire raked the ridge. Mortars fell. Tachovsky had seconds to choose: hold ground and die, or vanish. He chose vanish. With darkness and enemy fire, the platoon did what it trained for. It broke into small teams, 4 or 5 men each, independent movement, predetermined rally points. No shouting, no firing, no hero moments, just survival. Japanese patrols searched everywhere. Flashlights cut through brush. Voices called. Whistles signaled. Several times, teams lay within yards of enemy soldiers, motionless, breathing so shallow it felt like they might suffocate just to stay silent. One team, Strombos, watched a Japanese patrol pass within 10 feet. A soldier stopped, looked directly toward their hiding spot. 43 seconds of frozen time, and then he moved on. By 9 p.m., about half the platoon reached the rally point. Tachovsky counted heads. 23. 17 missing. He could wait. Standard procedure. But the rally point was too close to Japanese activity. Patrols were converging. If he stayed, he'd lose more. So he made the cold decision, move back to Marine lines with who he had. Send rescue teams at dawn. They approached friendly lines carefully, using recognition signals. In darkness, your own sentries can kill you. They whistled prearranged patterns, gave passwords, crossed into friendly territory around 9:41 p.m. 23 men made it back. 17 still out there. The Japanese tank attack continued through the night. By dawn, the Japanese had lost many tanks. The attack failed, but Marines paid in blood. And when the sun rose on June 16th, Tachovsky did what mattered most. He went back, not with a battalion, not with loud support, with small search teams, because the 40 Thieves didn't leave men behind. Not because it was noble, because it was practical. A missing man was either a body or a danger. Because if the Japanese captured anyone alive, they'd learn how deep the 40 Thieves had gone. They'd increase patrols. They'd adapt. And then the whole recon method could die. So at first light, teams moved into the jungle. They found the first body, then more. Some had been killed in withdrawal. Some had been captured and executed. The details weren't heroic. They were just the Pacific. Brutal, unsentimental, final. By mid-morning, they found some alive. Men who'd slipped through patrols and reached lines elsewhere. Then came word. 5 more Marines pinned in a cave system behind Japanese lines. Exhausted, sick. One with fever. One barely able to walk. Tachovsky faced a decision. Call artillery diversion, safer, but alerts the Japanese. Or go fast, riskier, but quiet. He chose speed, because speed was the only mercy available. A 6-man rescue element moved out, reached the cave around midday, distributed water, medical supplies. Then they had to get out. Broad daylight, 1 mile through enemy-controlled terrain. Standard doctrine said, move at night. But sick men can't wait. They moved, and ran into a Japanese patrol, about 20 soldiers. 2 options, hide and hope, or eliminate the patrol before it can raise alarm. Tachovsky chose ambush. Fast, violent, clean. They set an L-shaped ambush. The patrol walked into it. 11 Marines fired simultaneously. The patrol dropped in seconds. No survivors. No radio transmissions. But gunfire is loud. Now Japanese units would converge. The Marines ran. Speed over stealth. But the math turned ugly. They were about 800 yards from friendly positions across open ground. Carrying sick men. Pursued, they encountered a ravine. Steep, deep. Going around cost time. Going through is dangerous. Tachovsky chose the ravine. They slid and climbed down. Japanese soldiers appeared on the ridge above moments later, firing down. Bullets ricocheted. Grenades exploded. 1 Marine hit in the leg. Another caught shrapnel. They pushed forward because there was no other direction. Then they saw the final trap. The ravine ended in a box canyon. No exit. The Japanese began descending from multiple points. Tachovsky counted 40 enemy soldiers visible, more arriving. His men had limited ammunition. 2 sick men couldn't fight. 9 effective fighters against an increasing force. No artillery, too close. No air, too risky. They were alone. Then Tachovsky noticed something. The rear wall wasn't solid. Vegetation at the base suggested seepage. Water finds cracks. He sent 2 men to check. They found an opening hidden behind plants, barely wide enough to squeeze through. Beyond it, a fissure widened into a passage climbing upward through rock. They moved the sick men first. Men stripped packs, dragged gear. Darkness inside. Hands on shoulders, climbing blind. Behind them, Japanese voices echoed in the box canyon, searching for Americans who seemed to evaporate. Then daylight. The passage emerged on the opposite side of the ridge. The Marines moved fast, crossed the last distance to friendly lines. All 11 made it back, sick men evacuated, and suddenly the tally improved. 34 counted for, still missing some. But the unit survived, and more importantly, the unit's method proved itself. Small teams, independent decisions, adaptation, improvisation. The kind of warfare that later generations would call special operations, even though the Marines of 1944 just called it getting it done. Before we go deeper, because the next mission is where this platoon becomes legend, take a second to support the channel. If you want more untold World War II stories like this, stories about the men who never made headlines but changed how wars were fought, hit the like button. It tells the algorithm this kind of history matters. And subscribe if you want a new story every day. Now here's the question I want you to answer in the comments, because this is where the debate starts. Would you recruit criminals to build an elite unit? Or does discipline matter more than survival instinct? Drop your answer below, because Tachovsky's next decision on Saipan is going to challenge whatever you believe about good soldiers. Back to the story. At dawn on June 17th, the 40 thieves moved out again. Less than 40 now. Replacements integrated, wounds treated as much as possible, exhaustion swallowed like medicine. Their new objective, a ridge system 3 miles inland. Japanese artillery there had been shelling American lines for days. Aerial recon couldn't find the guns. Camouflage and caves made them invisible. Only ground recon could locate them. And the mission required the 40 thieves to go deeper behind enemy lines than any American unit had yet pushed on Saipan. They moved in complete silence, hand signals only. First mile in under an hour, second mile slower, steep terrain, dense vegetation, rock. By mid-morning they reached the ridge, and it was worse than expected. multiple cave entrances, large enough to hide artillery pieces, connected tunnels. Guns could fire, relocate, and vanish before counter-battery could respond. This explained the Marines' frustration. They weren't failing to hit the guns. They were firing at ghosts. Finding the guns wasn't enough. They needed to map the tunnel network so assault units could later neutralize it. And mapping required entering. 2 volunteers, Mullins and Strombo, slipped into the largest cave entrance. Inside, darkness, dripping water, air thick with gunpowder and human presence. They used tiny shielded flashlights, careful not to project light. They found a 105mm howitzer in a side passage, ammo stored in rock recesses. Gun crew absent, likely resting elsewhere. They marked, moved deeper, found more guns, a command area, an ammunition magazine with a shocking amount of rounds, sleeping quarters for dozens. The system was bigger than anyone guessed. Then, voices. Japanese soldiers approaching inside the cave. 15 seconds. Mullins and Strombo pressed into a shallow alcove, motionless. A dozen enemy soldiers walked past within feet. Their boots scraped rock. Their conversation echoed. And the 2 Americans didn't breathe until the sound faded. They withdrew, rejoined the platoon. Tachovsky studied their map. He realized standard assault tactics would fail here. You can't storm caves covered by machine guns. Artillery won't collapse deep tunnels. The only method was to seal entrances and destroy positions systematically, something engineers would have to do later. The 40 Thieves had given commanders what they needed, a way to stop fighting the ridge blind. Then Tachovsky decided to press one more mission before pulling back. Recon the town of Garapan. Garapan had been bombed and shelled. Ruins, smoke, broken streets. But there were Japanese soldiers moving through the wreckage. The Marines needed to know, was Garapan a fixed defense or a staging ground for counterattacks? Tachovsky picked 5 men for a daylight recon. That alone sounds insane. But the 40 Thieves existed for insane. They stripped gear that could rattle, carried only essentials, rifles, knives, sidearms. They moved into town using shadows and rubble as cover. Japanese soldiers everywhere, at least 200 visible, likely more concealed. Then one of the men spotted something absurdly simple. 5 bicycles, Japanese military bicycles. The kind officers used to move between positions. 5 bikes, 5 Marines, and the idea formed instantly. If they rode through town like Japanese messengers, they might attract less attention than if they crawled like hunted men. In the chaos of ruins, a small group moving with confidence can become invisible. That's a psychological truth most manuals don't teach. People see what they expect. Tachovsky approved the plan without hesitation. They took the bicycles. And then, almost unbelievably, they rode through Garapan in broad daylight. Casually, not hiding, not sprinting, just moving like they belonged. Japanese troops glanced, waved, shouted greetings in a language the Marines didn't understand. The Marines responded with vague gestures, enough confidence to pass as routine. For over 40 minutes they rode through the enemy-held capital, counting troops, mapping positions, identifying supply dumps. They passed within yards of Japanese officers, and no one suspected the truth. 5 Americans were stealing the town's secrets right in front of them. They exited, rode another mile, abandoned bikes, vanished back into jungle, and reached marine lines before night. The intelligence they brought back changed assault planning. It told commanders what kind of fight Garapan would be. And again, the 40 Thieves succeeded not through firepower, but through audacity and understanding of human expectation. Over the next 3 weeks, the 40 Thieves repeated the pattern across Saipan. Deep reconnaissance, coordinates for gunfire, ambushes on patrols, silent infiltration, independent decision-making. They operated in teams sometimes for days without contact. They suffered malaria, dysentery, heat exhaustion. They ran low on food and raided Japanese supply dumps. Ran low on water and drank from questionable streams because dehydration kills faster than infection. They saw horrors, the kind that never sits neatly in a history book. Civilians forced toward cliffs, wounded used as bait, Prisoners executed. Things men learned to carry in silence because there was no place to put them. By July 9th, Saipan was declared secure, and the 40 thieves had paid. Some killed, some wounded. Survivors with bodies reduced by 30, 40 pounds. Eyes older than the men. But the mission, by the standards that mattered, had succeeded. Commanders estimated their reconnaissance reduced overall Marine casualties significantly. Not because the 40 thieves fought big battles, because they prevented big mistakes. And that might be the most important lesson. In war, the men who save the most lives are often the ones nobody sees. After Saipan, the unit's story didn't become a Hollywood movie. It became a footnote. They fought at Tinian, returned from mopping up. Then the war ended and the world moved on as if survival had been a simple thing. For many of the men, peace was harder than combat. Today we'd call it PTSD. Then it was called nerves, or to drinking, or bad behavior, or just not adjusting. Nightmares, alcohol, jobs lost, relationships broken. A few couldn't stop looking for exits in every room. Because once you spend weeks behind enemy lines, your brain learns a new definition of safety. There is none. Tachovsky returned to civilian life. He didn't make speeches about heroism. He didn't tour telling war stories. He lived, worked, and according to the narrative passed down, he rarely spoke about what happened. Years later, the story surfaced again through personal artifacts. Footlockers, notes, memories that outlived the men who carried them. And when people learned about the 40 thieves, the debate reignited. Were they criminals turned into heroes? Or were they always warriors who never fit into peacetime boxes? Let's talk legacy, carefully. It's tempting to say the 40 thieves created Navy SEALs. That's a great line. It's also a simplified line. Modern special operations evolved from many streams. UDTs, raiders, recon units, and the hard-earned lessons across theaters. But here's what the 40 thieves undeniably proved in the Pacific. Small units can shape big battles if they feed accurate intelligence fast. Independent decision-making can outperform strict doctrine in chaotic terrain. Stealth and deep reconnaissance aren't side missions. They're force multipliers. Discipline alone doesn't make elite soldiers. Purpose, competence, and adaptability do. What Tachovsky did, whether every detail is perfectly recorded or partly legendary, represents a mindset shift. Stop fighting blind. Stop wasting men proving what's already true. Use the right people for the right job, even if they're not the right kind of people on paper. And that is the argument still worth having today. Because every military, and honestly, every organization, has its own brig men, talented people who don't fit the mold. The question is always the same. Do you punish them until they break? Or do you find where they're useful and aim them like a blade? If this story made you think, if it challenged what you believe about discipline, talent, and who deserves a second chance, hit like. It tells YouTube to show these forgotten histories to more people. Subscribe for more World War II stories you won't find in textbooks. And I want your answer in the comments. No safe answers, no fence-sitting. Should an elite unit ever be built from bad soldiers? Or does that kind of experiment risk turning war into something even darker? Tell me where you're watching from too. US, UK, Canada, Australia, Vietnam, anywhere. Because this community is how these stories stay alive. Frank Tachovsky and the men called the 40 Thieves were not perfect. But on Saipan, perfection wasn't required, only survival, and whatever they were before the war. On that island, in that jungle, under that sky, they became something the Marine Corps could never ignore again. They became proof that sometimes the men the world calls criminals are exactly the men who come back with the map.